So yes, the model was done, created, and then the change management had to happen. And everybody thought that analytics team is not the best person or team to go on the road and talk about this. So the stores leaders on the HQ side who were not analytical or that deeply analytical, they went on the road and they started this journey of educating people about this new optimization and how the model, how the new dollars will be allocated. Didn't work. So the first round, 20 stores, they used it, but we couldn't roll it out to all the 1,800 stores. Then we realized that everybody wanted to understand what went behind it. Nobody wanted the black box. People wanted to understand, why should I use it? Why is it different? So I think, yes, you don't want to talk to them that this is random forest or this is simplex algorithm, but they want to get the logic behind it, that if I'm going to use it to make day-to-day decisions or use it where it impacts me and hurts me a lot, how did you arrive at this decision? So it worked when we had the business person, but also somebody explaining the logic behind the new model.
Very good. Yeah. So that's a good point, that you can actually have that blend of the analytics person talking more about the logic and selling the point. Shailesh.
I was just saying, partly agreeing with that, which is, number one, I think analytics in of itself can't really lead impact. You need to have a little bit of ability to manage change. And one of the most effective things we have found is to give the power of doing analytics or playing around with numbers to the people who are actually going to make decisions. So, just along the lines that we heard, we basically in another context said, there's an analytics engine, we're going to give it to you. By the way, you've always made decisions based on heuristics. You're free to try out and say, if you did the decisions the way you did it in the past, what's the likelihood of you achieving a particular outcome, and fiddle around with some other parameters and see if you want to change that and see what happens next. And sure enough, if nothing, just because of gaming or just because of curiosity, they'll try it out 1 or 2 times, and when it begins to work, then it begins to catch like wildfire. So passing the power on to guys so that the story around why should I change becomes clear is damn important.
I totally corroborate that. We had experience with merchants. There is an art to it as well as the science to taking those buying decisions. So they didn't want to accept the recommendations coming out of the analytics team. But they also didn't want to use this jazzy tool that we had created for them. So we realized they love Excel and they love putting 1 and 0 in those Excel cells. So we gave them this ability to optimize their assortment and space so that they can put 1 and 0. So the ease of the tool was very useful. Yes, they wanted it on their fingertips, their decisions, but also an easier tool and nothing that makes it feel high-end and advanced analytics kinds.
So very quickly, 2 things. So I see analytics journey as an analytics transformation. So as part of the analytics program, I think it's not just important to have those statisticians or those data skills or other skills, but you need to have those kind of people who can actually interpret this and pass it on to the businesses, how things work. What's the simple meaning of this and how you can leverage this insight for your value generation. The second, I totally agree. I think we have been hearing about data democratization. I think it's analytics democratization. You really have to leverage apps, mobile apps, iPad app, whatever ways. Try them, give them their solution, give them the power with this. Just play it around. Let's do some test and run or test and controls. Do this and then showcase that value through these small apps, tools. This will give them power. This will give them confidence. This will help them realize the value which they are looking for. So these few things, small but important.
Yeah. But I'm just wondering, because to go down the democratization road means that you've already adopted. You've already got a lot of faith, because that's an investment, right? To skill up a number of people and power them with apps and stuff. So is the faith building required even before that? Because democratization sounds a little bit down the road to me.
Yeah, no, so, Sandeep, you could always do that in, or at least, what we recommend clients to do that in a controlled context. So let's say you were doing, a piece of work with, Salesforce of, let's say, an FMCG company. Standard issues that they would have is with respect to, let's say, route planning, right? Which stores to visit, what to push, what to promote. You can always build an analytics app and say, we are going to only try it out in, one sales area, one distributor area, and we'll see how it works. By the way, the algo needs to learn as well. So, it's not that, you're going to roll it out entirely. But, when it begins to work, let's say 2-3 months down the line, the sales folks from the neighboring distributor force begin to then say, hey, how come those guys got so much of a benefit and I didn't? I want it. And, you use that power to kind of, spread it around.
I think the Gamification example.
Gamification. So Manoj, any such examples of faith building and how it's been handled well that you've seen?
So what I've seen is, I mean, while I agree that we'll have to start, promoting, giving, empowering people with more and more data and more analytics, right, or democratization of analytics. What also helps is to feed them in smaller bits. I mean, one thing that I've also noticed in the entire change management experience that I've seen in a couple of implementation is, if you overload them with a lot of information on day one, it kind of, it pushes them back. I mean, so it's better to also release, to democratize it in a staggered manner, right? Start with smaller set of apps, smaller set of areas that you want them to do on their own, empower them maybe on a periodic basis, start adding more value to what they can do on their own, and what is controlled and given to them as just as information that they can act on, right? So that actually helps them to slowly absorb, and get into the system, rather than just flooding them with a lot of things, which kind of deters them.
Yes. Just to add to that point, especially when working with people in sales or the sales force at large, where I have seen it work effectively, I think people in general, but salespeople in particular, do what they're incentivized to do, right? So I mean, you're not going to get them to do something that runs counter to what's going to maximize their targets or numbers or whatever, right? So, if you don't build in the kind of positive credits or positive reinforcement for experimentation in such a way, they're not going to do it. Right? I mean, of course, and to everybody's point, I think if you then do it at a smaller scale and get a couple of advocates, they become your advocates, and again, they're salespeople, so they do a fantastic job of being your advocates for permeating through the organization. But I think the incentives part is something that I see is despite the best of intentions, is always missing in organizations where this is kind of a punt and they're just waiting to see if it works out, right? I mean, you need that push.
Right. See, on the data side, I think I don't think there's much value in talking about the fact that it is in silos and in different people, because everybody knows that. I mean, how do you overcome that? Is it like you keep knocking heads together till they kind of yield and say, all right, we'll share our data? What's the best way to kind of break out of that? Everybody seems to have that problem. Everybody knows it's the problem. Is knocking heads the solution?
I think Manoj made that point, was the IT and business have to work together.
So you knock their heads together?
Not really. Let me come to that. So there has to be a longer term strategy, a master data management, getting everything together, because it's more efficient at the end of the day. And it is one enterprise data warehouse, one single source of truth. But it takes 5, 10, 15 years sometimes for large organization to get the data together. And the ideal state is a moving target, right? I mean, you get some data together and you get into a new business, a new geography, or new source of data starts to come up. So the idea is to balance that. And today there are enough companies and tools in the market that help you with your specific problem. Our organization is one of them. So targeted towards verticals or towards business leaders, say particularly in marketing or in supply chain. These tools or these small companies, what they do is they bring data together for that specific use to build the momentum, right? You do something, you get the low-hanging fruits, your big bang for the buck, and you can prove it to the organization and help that longer roadmap. So yes, there is a 5-year roadmap. Example is, one retailer had a pharmacy business, but that they were not prioritized for the data to come into EDW. So what did they do? They got this small vendor, they got the data together, showed how much money they are saving on the fraud side of the drugs, because that happens, and immediately the data part, which was 5 years there for them down the line, suddenly was only 2 years down the line. So I think it is a combination of IT continuing to working to solve the world peace problem, but business having the agility and the freedom to get the data together for the business case.
So what you're saying is make the data a non-problem by saying, let's run with what we have and show results.
So I can get that. What is it?
Make the data non-problem by saying, let's run with what we have and show results and parallel track that big project. Would that be what we should recommend people do?
See, I mean, just to add something behind it.
You can contradict it, that's okay.
No, I mean, I actually viewed it slightly differently. I mean, so you were talking about, business getting access to data. I mean, the biggest challenge that IT always has in giving access to businesses, because they always want to, there are some regulatory reasons why they want to have control over the data and compliance and stuff like that. And that's why they, suggest that we build these sandbox kind of environments and stuff like that. And I think that's where you were heading to, saying that you bring in data, bring all the data together for specific purposes and stuff like that. The challenge that IT always faces, and me, having spent quite a bit of time on that side as well, on the technology side as well, is that, every time you get into this process of pulling data together, it consumes a lot of resources, both on the IT front, people, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a big process for that, for IT to manage itself on its own. But things have changed, things are improving, because you don't have to necessarily bring data over now. There are things like data virtualization that you can do. You don't have to necessarily bring data over into a place. You can still retain it there, lay out these softwares on top of it, where you can just connect across and bring it over. But yes, I mean, there should be common vision in terms of what you want to do. I mean, business cannot just overnight again request for hundreds of, terabytes of data for a specific project. I think there should be a common vision, there should be a plan in place. I mean, once that is laid out, I think it then becomes an easier, easier thing for the IT to, actionize it. I mean, put it into play, get out data into certain, certain sandbox environments or specific playground areas where the analyst can play with it. So the data is still under the control of the IT, but still it's free for the analyst to play around with.
See, bringing data together no longer for a specific project is not a terabyte issue anymore. It is, your data doesn't even need to leave your premises, or even if it leaves, most of these data integrators use cloud, and you need only certain amount of variables. If I'm doing just marketing automation, I don't need entire 1,000 variables lying in the marketing data warehouse for that. But I do want 20 variables from my own data set. I want 20 from the Unica that I'm using. I may want to use Nielsen and IRI data. I may want to use the social data. It will take my IT team forever to get it all together in data warehouse. But if I have a data integrator who's willing to do it out there, for me, cheaper, faster, why shouldn't I do it?
So, so we heard a couple of points about let's start quickly with what we have, or let's create a sandbox for people to play with. Is there a risk that we'll end up with very small projects which will end up becoming trivial in the larger picture, because people are running off and doing small things on available data, but that's not solving the larger organizational challenge? Is that a risk of that approach, of starting small?
Firstly, analytics or no analytics, we as management consulting firms face this issue all the time. And I tend to agree with, the approach, which is, if you waited for all the data to fall in place, no engagement would ever take off the ground, right? So I think one has to be a little bit pragmatic about it. Of course, absence of data or very sparse data doesn't help you make informed decisions or informed choices. But waiting for, the full set of data to emerge is also going to take eternity. So, one needs to have the right balance. So I would still go with the approach of saying, pick the most important problem. Let's get started with the data that you have and begin to show how much of an impact it could make. And that way you build conviction that, if you had more data, you can, do more. More often than not, it seems to work. Particularly if the problem is big, you'll also get support from the CEO, the chairman, or the board, or whoever as well.
So they have to have the right perspective. That we are running with this. It's not going to change the world, but it'll do enough to rally other people.
To get started,
See, it's as simple as that. If I go to the CEO and tell him I need $20 million to build this EDW, and he say, what is going to yield me? And if I don't have the use case, I have done no small project or proof of concept, I have no numbers to share. Now, if I do the proof of concept with whatever data I have, I can say, yes, with this much data, I generated $5 million in EBIT. If I have all the data and I do it for all the categories and for all the geographies, imagine the impact. Just an easier conversation.
So I can add,
sure, Rajat.
So see, the whole that we talk about, so a lot of people have different ways of approaching analytics. One is like, I'll have my data warehouse, I'll have my BI, and then I'll go for analytics. That's, as all of us are agreeing, it's not the best way around. And frankly, it's always the other way, and many a times it's the other way around. It's the management consultant, business people actually tells us that I cannot validate this hypothesis, and then they ask their IT people that, can you procure or start storing this data? So that's I would say, a parallel thing that keeps running. There's a feedback loop. So if you just keep a step approach that I'll have my data warehouse in place and then I'll start going ahead, it's gonna shoot back again. Secondly, I think as part of the larger strategy, it's important to identify, as they have been saying, that those easy to implement, easy to go ahead, and business important use cases and deliver the value and then go ahead till the last mile. Many a time just building a model saying that, oh yeah, it has some predictive power, we have some data, it's showing some cool insights. No, go to the last mile to have that impact. Then only that use case will be having a check mark or a success. Otherwise, still the people will still have some of the other question marks. Yeah, this looks good on slides. Those guys came and they showed some good fancy slide, but how would it translate to ground? Until unless you don't show that value on ground, we have some issues there.
Okay, so we don't have too much time. So we'll take one very small kind of question and then we'll get to kind of winding up. But the thing is, if you're going to drive everything towards showing some quick impact, some quick insight, some quick value that you're going to then leverage, it's a kind of shaky ground as well, because if that doesn't work out, then you're kind of on thin ice. And the entire organization will come at you with their biases and their mindsets, and people will be quite happy to tear down that project on which a lot is hinging. So how do you de-risk from skating on that thin ice?
I would say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying I'm yet to see a business problem where use of data has not led to at least a 10-15% improvement. So I'll
End
have
of
the
story.
conviction and go for
10-15% lift. That's what you need.
I would just add, a small failure is easier to forget. Even if it's a failure, it didn't pan out for whatever reason, I couldn't implement it because the system didn't allow implementation. It'll be easier to forget. But if I go invest in a large-scale data warehouse and it is not useful, nobody will forget that. And then I invested, I bought the tool, what happened? Then there'll be 5-year, regression that, okay, I don't think analytics helps. And then we have to do change management all over again.
Your prioritization has an issue. If you think that it backfired, then I think your prioritization or choosing of those cases is
And it's also easy to back out and change your plans. Even if you've invested in technology and software and stuff like that, it's easy to just back out and change your plans and rebuild the architecture and stuff like that. So you wouldn't have spent so much.
Okay, so the ice is not as thin as I fear. Harish, you had a point?
Yeah, I was going to say typically picking the problem or the problem child usually works well. Right? Quite often, problem child projects tend to not work as well, or problem child sales engines or marketing engines tend to not work as well because they tend not to be either data-driven in their approach, or they tend not to close the loop. Right? And if you can kind of close that loop in all of the steps, which is start with a clear hypothesis, pick the right data, and then get the insights, and as Rajat was saying, translate it into a business insight and then figure out what's going on. Look, your odds are much higher of improving something that's not quite working, and it's much more visible, right? And to that point, and to something Iqbal was saying earlier, I think if you have a data repository or a data warehouse, and the challenge is in either convincing management to invest enough or to pull the requisite data, I'd argue that's the least of your problems, right? Because I think the bigger problem is when, as Rajat was saying, people just don't track the data, right? Or you don't know what to track, and you just kind of you have this kind of complete dump sitting somewhere on a server, and you really don't know what to do. So I think if the more you can try and eliminate the mindset of business requesting data from IT and IT providing data to business, and actually having that be a seamless loop, or the closer you can get to it, the better. And if you start with kind of a bad case, then the delta is easier, right?
The bad case backfired for us one time. So be careful, don't pick up the world peace problem.
Okay, so I think that's the time that we had, and we have to open it up for questions. But in summary, for all those of you who want to drive adoption, get the strategy in place, get some quick use cases, and make sure that you select the right kind of use cases that are going to succeed and have some kind of business impact. The data problem should not be a hurdle at all. You kind of work smart around what you already have, and if you can democratize it, then that's a good way of getting a lot more people involved. And with IT and business, maybe not head knocking, but yeah, kind of get them to work together. It's really simple. That is the essential message that we had out here. Questions? You can post the question to the panel as a whole or to any individual. We'll need some mics out there. I think all the mics are up here, so.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to get your perspective on the challenges and how insurmountable they appear, whether you are an in-house consultant or an external service provider, what's the difference?
We carefully stayed away from that question because we got a lot of consultants on stage. Should it be done in-house or should it be given to an external consultant?
I have been on both sides of the table and I have a point of view. If you have, I mean, it's a simple question of what you can do and what you can do cheaper, right? If I have the ability and or if it is competitive edge for me, I should do it in-house very clearly. But if I don't know how to do it, I need a strategic partner to build that. And if it's not a competitive edge, it's run-of-the-mill analytics, marketing analytics, assortment analytics, that's not really going to make any difference who does it. Why not get partners or somebody else to do it for you? I mean, at the end of it, if my job is a retailer or a bank, I should focus on that competency and get better there with the use of analytics. Building an analytics competency is not always beneficial for me.
I always felt that it's good always to get an outside-in view of things. So I would always suggest that you bring in somebody from the external world, but to what extent you want to involve people from the external world is something that you'll have to decide based on your level of confidence and competence in that area that you're working on.
Okay, guys, no more it depends statements. What's your point of view?
I would say we should involve.
Okay.
So I suggest both. I mean, so I was talking to a CXO for a leading media company, and he was having some good praises about consultant. They said that, yes, I do have an in-house team that do all this kind of a thing, but there is an additional knowledge and perspective that you people are bringing that helps me improvise my processes, that helps me identify new problems, new challenges, which I can now solve by this data. So a right mix is needed. Now, I understand few challenges, especially in financial services, the risk and the regulatory things, that certain things has to be in-house, so that's fine. But other things which we have an option of engaging with a right partner, that opportunity should be leveraged, a right balance should be struck, and because the value add that a consultant or that do would definitely be appreciated by the CXO.
So do you have another question? Time for another question?
Yes, I do.
So let's do one more question. I think the consensus is get someone else in.
Yeah.
So one more question.
Yeah, hi. My name is Nitin, and before I get to the question, a comment, and Iqbal called it out. So I'm from Walmart, and we do have an analytics team. And Teradata is not the only database that we have. We have many, many more. So thanks for calling it out. Just wanted to get your perspective, anybody on the panel, and their perspective on, Sandeep, you also spoke about it in your session a little while ago, that analytics is not just one thing, and in some people's mind, it's also everything. And it's also kind of been thought of as this magic ball, which you either throw at a data, or a big pool of data, or throw the data at the ball, and the magic will happen. What are your views or experiences or any challenges that you've seen in changing that mindset? Because it's not really that, there's just magic formula that will work in any situation.
Okay, so people waiting for that aha moment have a long time or a long wait coming. I think that's the point you're making, right? That if there's some magic formula and that's going to cause disappointment, so how do you overcome that challenge? Is that
yes,
right?
of that sort.
All right. Maybe Harish and Shailesh, since this belief that analytics is this magic potion that's going to solve for all the ills of the world, but that's going to lead you no, the point is that that's going to lead to disappointment. So how do you kind of overcome that challenge as well? Unless you feel it's not going to lead to disappointment, because 10 to 15% lift is going to happen anyway.
No, but this goes back to, I think, I think right up front I said the second point, which is, the providers of analytics have to demystify it. It cannot be seen as an esoteric thing that is understood only by a few that can solve world hunger. Sure, it may, but that's not the way to get, the businesses to buy in. So I think we need to step it down considerably. We have been making data-driven decisions for long. This is a tool that helps you make it better, cheaper, faster.
Yeah, so to add to that, I mean, you've had the phrase analyst in job titles for decades, way before analytics was cool, right? Analyst, right? And part of it was, to Shailesh's point, I mean, we've always made data-driven decisions from way back. I think and to some extent, gut decisions are also, analytical decisions that we just don't know what the neural network is. but I think the bigger point is that if analytics is seen as this kind of, this team sitting in the basement crunching numbers and is going to give you this magical insight, then I'd surmise those are the organizations where it's not going to succeed. Right? So I think it has to be much closer to business. And when it is much closer to business, it has to actually, arguably it needs to be part of the business. and you know, there's a bit of back and forth that is just inevitable here, right? So otherwise you're just going to get a whole set of insights that have no real meaning. So the closer you can bring the business side and the analytics team, I think, the better. And to kind of address an earlier point about whether you should bring somebody from outside or in-house, if you do hire Shailesh or Rajat or anybody, I'd suggest that part of the mandate should be to help you build your in-house team if you don't have that capability in-house, right? I think it's not an either or. I think it's, if you don't have the capability, you start with outside, but part of building that capability inside needs to be built into the project.
All right. So I think essentially people are saying, don't let the analysts be the goblins in the caves, you know, kind of chipping away at their magic. Bring them out into the light and demystify it. Don't let it be a black box. All right. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to the panel for that interesting discussion. Thank you so much. Check. So, it's time for a quick coffee break. Since we are running a little late, we'll request you to quickly go get a cup of coffee.